Hi there. You found Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast. You are joining us tonight or today, whenever you're listening, for two chapters from Winter's Heart, the article-less ninth book in the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time series. We are talking tonight about Chapter 7, The Streets of Caemlyn, and Chapter 8, Sea Folk and Kin. But will I, Greg, be your only host? Of course not. Here's Tyler. Tyler, how's it going?
It's going very well. I think we are in the heart of summer at this point as we are recording, despite the fact that the book is called Winter's Heart. And let me tell you, picturing like snow-covered plains is exactly what I needed this week when it rarely got below 90 degrees outside. It is blessedly 80. And that's a win in Boston right now. So I kind of appreciated these chapters. They were a little on the slight side. They were a little on the recappy side at times, but like they gave the vibe that I kind of needed in the midst of just sweating for the entire week.
I concur. I didn't read them till today, so it was kind of after the heat wave had broken.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, it is funny that this really feels like we timed it wrong. That I was freezing down here in the basement for the last book, and now that the weather's changed, I'm here. Somebody actually on a different show just asked me, like, "Is this the time of year that it's good to podcast all the time?" I'm like, it's better, but the level of heat we've been facing means it's not even like refreshing down in my basement. It's a little better. It's not, sweltering like it is upstairs, but I would not say I'm like, so comfortable down here. Although it's usually a little painful when I get back upstairs. So I will say, just as who knows when we're recording, but maybe it's 4th of July weekend. And I will say some of my family's festivities is we went browsing around some bookstores, and I started looking around different bookstores for book 10. Like, I want to be ready, and I think I'm going to have to probably order it online. You said it was probably going to be true, and it does feel like this is the dead zone nobody keeps on in stock regularly.
Yeah, I think that's about right. So I think it's about time that we turn our attention to the chapters themselves. And we got our first check-in this week with Elaine. And that's an opportunity to see some characters we haven't for a little while. And it's an opportunity to go full Agatha Christie. I want my murder mystery that I was promised at the end of the last book. What was your kind of overall impression first time back with Elaine? Did it conform to what you expected, or were there surprises kind of in what these chapters included?
I respect your question, and I respect your ability to ask it, but don't I need to then ask, aren't we supposed to do an ill-advised discussion of visual media on a non-visual podcast first? Before we get to the Elaine of it all, we have some unfinished business from last week, which is Tyler recognized in his, he has a small 2-bedroom apartment, but there's an adjoining gallery that is a 4-room conclave of just the greatest art gallery of Wheel of Time art you will ever see. And he found that the old paperback of this book, Winter's Heart, which you should now Google, dear listeners, was last week, and we had not talked about it. So, Tyler, what did I miss in that introduction?
Yeah, so the big news here is that we have a bunch of characters on the cover of Winter's Heart in the original edition. This is not the ebook cover if you are Googling yourself to find the image. And this image gives us a collection of characters that I'm pretty sure only appear on the page together in the previous chapter. So we have what I belovedly refer to as Hobbit Perrin. He should not be that short, but apparently that's Perrin. He is standing next to an Aiel in full Cadden Sore, which I assume is probably Gaul, but could be any of the other Aiel who are with him. Behind them is a man in what looks like almost like priest's outfits, and is completely bald. I have no idea who that character is. It could be Mazima, it could be Elias. There's a few different options for kind of an older male character. And then there is a fancily dressed woman wielding a scepter, presumably an Aes Sedai, but could also just as easily be one of the wise women or even Barrelane without too much issue. There is also a flag in this image, which I believe has a falcon on it, making it likely the flag of Barrelane and Mayenne. And that's the image. They are in a winter scene, and Do these four characters actually interact with one another in the same sequence? No. I don't even know which characters they are necessarily. But the only chapter where those four types of characters are on the page in this chapter, or in this book, I'm pretty sure, was last week. What do we think of this cover, Greg?
Actually, when you were joking about Hobbit-sized parent, it made me think of Deadpool and Wolverine. There's the joke where Deadpool says, "Oh, comic book accurate size Wolverine" in one of the parallel dimensions. So it's the opposite because it's not accurate to the books, but it does feel like that version of parent. Actually, my favorite part of this cover is the background, which didn't get a shout from you just now as you described it. It's a bit generic, but it does feel like how I'm picturing this region, which is a snowy mountainside, some evergreen trees, some snow-covered trees, and just a nice hillside in the background. So it makes me a little homesick for New Hampshire in that kind of way. A hill looks in the distance. So I like that piece. And then I also like the detail of the fact that the horses are breathing and you can see their breath in the cold to remind you just how cold this is. So I guess maybe my failure as a reader is I still hadn't been necessarily thinking like, oh, these characters are on the plains of Hoth. Like, this is a very cold, wintry scene, even though all the details are there, the naked people in the snow, we've had them. So this is helpful to picture it that way. And is, I do think that one guy looks like he's Friar Tuck. They just had already drafted a Robin Hood cover.
Yep.
Actually, in either the Aiel or Perrin has a big quiver, so maybe it is just a repurposed Robin Hood cover.
Yeah, you might not be wrong about this. This is one of my least favorite of the original covers, purely because Hobbit Perrin plus who the hell is that in the background with no hair equals, it's just not a comic accurate. It's not a book accurate cover, right? It just does not work for me. I don't have much else to say about this cover. It's ugly.
I just want to note that when you were describing the female character, I immediately thought it was Berylane. I read her not as Aes Sedai, but just like fancy dressed woman, so aristocratic woman. I don't really know that we've ever had her with a scepter or anything similar, but that's where my mind went first.
I think the scepter is the only reason I read Aes Sedai instead of Berylane, so I'm totally willing to accept that that's just Berylane with an item that she's never held before, because that's how these covers function. So let's now return to the original question I asked you before you remembered that we had an ill-advised discussion that I absolutely would have forgotten about. Thank you very much, Greg. That question being, now that we've read a couple of chapters about Elaine, did these chapters conform broadly to your expectations about what you wanted from Elaine, or is there something that you feel like we're missing after a couple chapters in her POV?
And just remind me, you said this is our first Elaine POV. Was she in the prologue, or have we not flashed to her since
No, that
the
is
end?
absolutely correct. She was in the prologue. She and Avienda had their ceremony becoming sisters in the Aiel way.
Right. Oh, how could we forget? I mean, I read those chapters 5 times. I cracked the spine. That's what we call it in the hot weather. So I think it's largely where I thought she would be. I mean, I think it was clear to me that we were entering courtly intrigue with her. I think when she first entered the city, I said something along the lines of like, oh, I thought she would just assume the throne, but it was very clear it was going to be about politics and it's going to be about kind of building up enough influence to take the throne kind of like democratically almost. It's not quite the right word, but to be a popular leader in regards to that. So I can't say I was like, yes, this is exactly what I thought. And then, as you noted, there's this nice thread of Agatha Christie, who's the spy, that's being dangled here. So I'm excited for all that, but I probably shouldn't say anything else until you summarize the chapter.
Which is chapter 7, The Streets of Caemlyn. Elaine is in a procession through the streets. She worries that she does not yet have a hold on the heart of Caemlyn, and that can bring down queens. Her companions also draw eyes. There is an Aes Sedai and a warder, and a number of female soldiers. Her guard captain warns that there are sisters in the city who may want to take her for Elida, and Elaine then says that she won't give in to fear of being kidnapped. Saratha, the Aes Sedai with her, thinks that it is unnecessary risk to be out, and as Elaine watches the refugees pass, she gives coins to one needy woman and is chastised by Saratha because she can't help everyone. The city seems to be thriving with the influx of refugees, but Elaine is distracted as Brigitte approaches because she can feel her emotions. Brigitte apparently is losing her memories, and the earliest ones have faded, but she reports that two of the High Lords who are being brought into the city have been captured. They worry about spies in the palace being the reason that these lords were kidnapped, and Elaine blames herself, but Brigitte is too pragmatic to allow her to wallow too much. Brigitte then hints that she knows Elaine has been sneaking out in disguise in the evenings and makes it clear the danger of these excursions. They discuss the kidnapped ladies, unsure who did it, and Elaine says that soon they will know because what the response from the different nobles will tell them who kidnapped the individuals. Once they arrive at the palace, it is a buzz because everyone notices when Brigitte leaves in a hurry, and Elaine carefully studies the servants as they work, noting how many of them are new and undertrained, which is a large number of individuals who could potentially be a spy. Elaine then tries to deflect Brigitte's anger by talking about warder cloaks and whether Brigitte wants one, and then changes the subject to Brigitte swearing too much for her official position, but Brigitte is still upset about the fact that Elaine is sneaking out in the evenings. Elaine is frustrated that a hero for the Horn is warning her about taking risks, and then she calls for Reen Harfer and realizes that she no longer trusts anyone in her service, possibly including Reen. So, I'll be honest, I have like 3 things to say about this chapter. It's good, but it's one of those where things just kind of move along and we have plot points to discuss. So, what did you think of the Streets of Caemlyn?
Uh, yeah, I mean, a fair reintroduction. I thought it was doing some good characterization work to try to show what kind of leader Elaine is. So the fact that Elaine is out there on the streets amongst the people, not protecting herself behind the wall, it means she's a confident leader, although there's politics in that suggests she's out there because she's not confident about her popular support.
Yeah.
And has reason to with the kind of jeers she receives. So I think I liked that dynamic overall, and I was pleased to get a little bit of that. I think to me, I would broadly say this largely confirms the type of leader I thought Elaine would be, which is kind of just and good in the realm of all the leaders we've seen.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting dynamic early on in this chapter because, as you say, it is the very first opportunity we get to see Elaine as a ruler, as a leader, right? And it kind of shows us, as you say, who she's going to be, how she is viewing the people, and it really confirms, as you're saying, like how good of a leader I think she's going to be. But the reason that I don't think this is like super exciting, the reason it doesn't like get me amped is because we've already kind of known what kind of leader she's going to be because she's been talking to the common people and thinking about how she's going to be as a leader for the past like 6 books. And so this was both kind of like new and interesting, but also felt like it was just showing things that we already had told to us. And so I was kind of like bouncing back and forth between this is a really good chapter and one that I kind of like struggled to see what the momentum in it was. Were you on either of those extremes or somewhere in the middle?
I mean, I think I probably gave it more credit just as I try to give these early sections of the book the benefit of the doubt that like the job is to reintroduce where these characters are and who they are. I think we talked about this fairly recently because I was jumping into a sequel book and I'd read the first one a while ago. I was like, I don't remember who any of these characters are. Whereas other times authors are really good at just giving you enough of those little hints and sprinkles so that you can dive right back in. And I think I've said before, I really enjoy the Robert Jackson Bennett's books. He is the Tainted Cup was the first of the latest series. I forget what he calls the larger series, but like I always have found his ability to just be like, and remember, these are the 3 weird things, and not like pause and describe them, but just have the characters do 3 weird things. You're like, oh right, she's the one who always does that thing, and so on. And so I think I'm probably a little more generous that it's like, well, yes, you're right. As I said too, like it's just confirming what I thought Elaine would be like. But in the same way, if this had been 2 years since the last book had come out, I would be reminded of what I thought Elaine was like.
Yeah, no, that's a really good call. Is we have a very different position in that we took 3 weeks off instead of 3 years off. And so I think we've got to keep that in mind, which is something that Robert Jordan was probably writing towards. I then want to talk a little bit about Brigitte, because for the most part, she kind of shows up with news and is just advancing the plot. But there's one really tantalizing detail that we've gotten little hints at before, but is really kind of crystallized here, which is that Brigitte is losing her memories, and she seems to be losing them from oldest to newest. I believe here it's described that she can barely remember anything that happened before the breaking of the world. So she's lived many lives since then, but the lives before that are vanishing. And I find that to be really interesting as we see this character kind of stressed out throughout this and the next chapter, to kind of think about how much the non actual stressors are weighing on her versus, like, the duties that she's being called upon to do by Elaine. So, what are your thoughts on Brigitte here?
I mean, I actually found myself, like, as I was reading through this chapter, being like, oh, right, she's a mythological hero resurrected. Like,
Yeah.
it's almost like it hasn't registered in a little while. While I've always known that that's true, I think it's been much more about how she plays the role of the warder and the kind of uneasy relationship she has taking orders from these young women at times. I mean, most of the time it's very harmonious. So I think it was like, oh, right, like she's resurrected. And so, I mean, I wanted to call it a Back to the Future thing, but it's essentially the opposite. Whereas Back to the Future, the person fades to match the reality. It's the past is fading here and keeping the person in the present. So it's a reverse Back to the Future, one of those things we all know about. But it kind of works for me as a device, and it seems to me that it is something that will fade as she lives this life, and then I assume if she's killed, it'll be like she's back in the pool or whatever. Like, I guess I don't necessarily have enough knowledge of the metaphysics of this world that I really think it's like incredibly dangerous that she's losing these memories. And you presented it kind of as a curiosity, not a like ticking time bomb of danger.
And I think that's the way I'm presenting it, because that seems to be the way that Elaine and a lot of the other, well, not a lot, the only other people who know about it seem to be kind of treating it that way. But I think it's important in these scenes to be kind of keeping in mind that Brigitte probably has the worst case scenario running through her mind here, in addition to the way that we're kind of framing it as like, it's odd, but it's not the end of the world. And that just kind of like, this character, who, as you say, is a mythical hero, dealing with this kind of very real, like, just too much all at once concern, I think it's an interesting thing to be keeping an eye on in coming chapters, right? How much is Brigitte stretched too thin, and how much of that is because of just like the psychological toll of whatever it is she's losing throughout this. So I don't have much else to say here, but I just kind of want to put a pin in that as we move forward. Any last thoughts on her before we move on to the news of the day, which is two lords/ladies being kidnapped on their way to Caemlyn?
No, let's talk about him. Uh-oh, trouble ahead.
Yep, that's what I got to. They get kidnapped, and that seems bad.
I just kept singing Hamilton. We had a spy on the inside. That's right, Hercules Mulligan. He's not in this book, but that's what I kept singing to myself.
If Hercules Mulligan was the spy in this book, that would have been absolutely incredible.
An epic. That's probably mostly because we're in 4th of July season, and so Hamilton's been in our car. They're also playing it in town outside one night this week. I was going to invite you to that, but then I didn't, and now I'm just mentioning it on a podcast.
That's fair. I wouldn't have gone anyways. It was probably after 4 p.m. I don't really go out at night. I then am kind of left with this interesting kind of thread that goes throughout this chapter, which is Elaine trying to figure out kind of the mood of the people and where the city is at. And as you say, I think most of this is just like making us realize that she's going to be a really good leader. She's paying attention to the people and not just her own political structure. But I think there is something really interesting to the fact that she really feels like she needs a pulse on what is going on in Caemlyn. She thinks that she is behind, that she is not where she needs to be winning the conflict, and that she seems to be going out in secret in the evenings. And there's a part of me that wonders how much of this is her just wanting to know what's happening versus she has some sort of plan to influence the opinions of the people in the city. Did you like have any thoughts or intrigue around what she seems to be doing? Because there's this weird through line of this chapter that she's going out in the evenings and Brigitte doesn't like it.
Not a lot of insight into what she's potentially doing, and there's also some moments I would put in concert with this where she like almost sees somebody she thinks she recognizes, or like women who stand out, things like that, and keeping track of the Aes Sedai is kind of all of that. So I read it all as kind of she's engaged with trying to keep an eye on the city, and not that's actually separate from the like I need to win over the people, but also like I need to be aware of who's around here, and recognize, I mean, obviously counting Aes Sedai is all about the threat to Rand, but she reminds us here that it's a threat to her as well, and she doesn't actually know what would happen if they grabbed her and took her to the tower, and like would she be a prize for the tower, and so on. And there's a little more kind of about things like that in the next chapter. So it just felt to me like, again, a way to remind us that Elaine is she's young, but she's not naive. She's worldly. She's got a good head on her shoulders, and she's probably working on a kind of three-dimensional chess game that others are also playing.
Yeah. Last comment that I had on this chapter is in the early part of the chapter, it feels like Elaine is like sizing up the city and deciding like they're not quite on my side, but I can get there. And in those moments, it feels like she's like, I control the palace, but I don't control the city yet. And by the end of this chapter, when she's looking for spies, it kind of feels like she's lost control of the palace. And I thought that shift in dynamic was really well done by Robert Jordan. Like, I felt the internal panic a little bit more than I expected to at the idea that, like, the person taking care of her horse could be a spy. I don't have much to say beyond, like, good job, but good job, Robert Jordan. It worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we sometimes, like, we're just plowing through no matter what, despite whatever pain we're in. But I think it's easy to discount that, like, part of Robert Jordan's job when writing this is not just telling his story, but making sure that the characters get serviced in nearly every book. I mean, they all step back. Where are you, Matt? What's going on, Matt? Where is Matt? Is he all right? It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your Matt is? But we also forget that, like, you have to not just remind us they exist and advance their larger plot, but give us something they can be doing at a given moment, right? So I'm interested here to see that this is the thing we're going to be doing, presumably this book, right? It feels like a book level boss or plot. Yeah. So I'm excited to see that. And the list of all the people we have who are potentially enemies of Elaine is long, like which faction these people could just belong to, down to the level of like some petty lord or lady who's just trying to get the throne, up to, you know, a Forsaken trying to get to Rand through her or some such.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. There's just so much question marks in this plot line that it's kind of about figuring out which one of them will blow up in this book versus which ones are kind of longer term problems. I don't have too much else to say here. I think we've kind of covered all of the major issues. Any last thoughts before I have a slightly longer summary of Seafolk and Kin, which I thought was a good chapter, I have to say.
Please continue towards the summary.
Reen reports no captured spies yet, and Elaine's day seems busy, starting with Halwyn Nori, who more or less runs the economy of Caemlyn. She spots the Kin with a captive and an Adam, and she thinks that the palace is packed with all of the channelers that she has brought with her. The Kin, who admitted to being runaways, are back in Navis White, and Vandene, who seems grim since the murder of her sister, approaches Elaine to tell her that these novices have approached Vandene with a theory that narrows down the identity of the killer of Adelias to Merilil, Saratha, and Syrian. Vandene insists that either Elaine or Nynaeve needs to take charge of these elderly novices because clearly they are out of control for hypothesizing about who murdered someone who was with them. I was kind of laughing at the idea that these novices were out of line, but whatever. Nynaeve then arrives suddenly with Lan and seems upset about having another task put on her plate because because she is clearly the one who is going to be taking care of these elder novices. The kin are apparently a handful for Nynaeve to be managing, as are the sea folk. Nynaeve tries to pawn off the elder novices on Vandene, insisting that they can learn to be helpful, and Vandene eventually gives in. Nynaeve says that Vandene seems to be refusing help for her sleep and also for her grief at losing her sister, and Nynaeve is still apparently in the honeymoon phase with Lan and is over-explaining that to Elaine. Nynaeve insists that she knew all of Elaine's issues that have arisen so far, but Nynaeve has apparently been coordinating a plan with the kin to have them travel into Seanchan territory and rescue individuals who were members of the kin and might not have gotten out. Nynaeve worries that Egwene needs a plan for the kin, or all of this will fall apart as soon as the kin are reunited with the Aes Sedai in the White Tower. They then enter a room with Elise and a Suldam, who still denies that she can channel or see the flows of the One Power. The Suldam say it must be a trick of the power that they can sometimes see the flows, and they deny any possibility that they could learn to channel. 3 damane seem ready to be let out of their collars, according to Elise, but Elise is apprehensive about this because only one of the women, Olivia, seems to actually want to be free, as opposed to simply accepting that she could be out of the collar. We learn that Olivia is nearly 400 years old, and she could apparently level the palace, as she is extremely powerful in the One Power. Lan at this point says that if they keep her collared for their safety, they're just like the Seanchan, and the other 2 women who are in the collars seem to also potentially be an issue. It seems like they almost like being property, and they would absolutely obey a Suldam, even if the Suldam told them to help them escape. Nynaeve says that they will need to be watched at all times, but the Adams need to be removed. Lan seems to approve of this, saying Taishar Manatherin, and Nynaeve seems extremely proud of the fact that she has been praised. The Suldam begins to cry at the fact that she can see weaves of the One Power, and Elaine decides that none of what she heard today was actually good news. So, Sea Folk and Kin is a good name for this chapter. I found this to be a really engaging catch-up chapter. There's enough news sprinkled in that I was kind of gobbling up all the information. Were you also having a Pac-Man-like experience, or did you like this less than I did?
No, I would say I preferred this of the 2 tonight. I think there are a few non sequitur reactions I had. One is Nynaeve and Lan continues to be weird, and I can't really put my finger on it, except that they keep saying it's weird. But it feels like, and I'm treading very carefully here, when like I've had let's say 50 plus family members like get not that number, people who are that old, people who are above 50, remarry, and they're suddenly kind of like way into each other in like a way where you're like, yeah, that's not fun for the rest of us. Like, we're glad that you like to put your hands in each other's jean pockets, but we're all bummed out. Seriously. So, and I recognize that, Lan is older, but that's not Nynaeve. Like, that's, she's young and such, but
no,
it feels like that
so
vibe.
Much worse. This is the professor and his student putting their hands in each other's jean pockets. This is worse.
And so that all kind of registers as weird. And then I guess by the end of the chapter I'm okay with it, but it was really kind of upsetting to me at first, where it's like, oh, she's been given Seanchan, that like these women as like she's been giving prisoners of war. Okay, I've been living Spielberg for a lot of different reasons lately, so maybe I read these chapters like almost immediately after watching Schindler's List, but I was like, this is not okay. Like, nothing is okay here. Nothing is there, and I don't think it's meant to read like that extreme at all, and I don't invoke anything lightly, but it was like pretty upsetting. And then I think your summary revealed, and I think the correct read on it that I'm sure we'll unpack a little bit more is, can we figure out a way to save these people? But it all took it a lot more lightly than I think of Egwene with her PTSD from being collared. So it was a little tricky for me in those regards.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the first things that I wanted to highlight here. It kind of comes up at the end of the chapter, but it's a kind of reveal that slowly makes its way through this chapter where you're like, why is there an Adam? What is going on here? And by the end of it, you get kind of all the details. I immediately had one very simple question. I think Rand picked the wrong e-girl. Like, why are these Seldom and damane going to Elaine and not Egwene? Right? It feels like Egwene both has more context and understanding of how these women would need to be treated, and also she has hundreds of channelers on her side, as opposed to Elaine, which Rand, I don't think, knew she had anyone with her but Nynaeve. Like, dropping 20-something Shan channelers in her lap is a horrible idea.
Well, and I think of Nynaeve as the healer, so you might think of like sending them her way, but you're right that this is very clearly like this. Actually, I was just thinking there's a really old Robot Chicken sketch where Anakin cuts the heads off all the Padawans, and then it says, "Honey, I got you some flowers," and you just hear Padme scream. And it kind of feels like that. Like, this is just a courting gift that Rand totally misreads. It's like, I know what she'd want: 20 prisoners of war. And she's like, I am not about that life. That's very silly, but at the same time, it is fair, I think, to point out what you're pointing out, which is, it seems to suggest he thinks she's the most powerful, and everything we've read is that she's the last of the three who has that kind of deep reserve of power, right? Elaine is not as strong as Nynaeve or Egwene. Never mind the numbers of being... I mean, does Rand know at this point Egwene is Amyrlin? I don't even know if he knows that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he does.
So, yeah. Okay.
Took me a minute to make sure that was true in my brain, but yes, that is true.
Because there's always that lag of like how far the ravens fly after that. But yeah, so maybe that's just a sign of like, I certainly don't think of Egwene and Rand as allies like I once did. I don't think they're openly hostile, but they're not coordinating in a way that he maybe is assuming Elaine would coordinate with him.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. At this point, I want to take this chapter roughly chronologically, mostly just so that I don't lose any of the pieces here, which means that we are going to start with the elderly novices, right? So at the end of the last book, we learned that 2 of the women who were with the kin were runaways from the tower. And so one of the Aes Sedai, it might have been Van Dien, I can't remember exactly which one, demanded runaways become novices again. Those are the rules. And both of the women agreed to that, but now they are causing problems. They are kind of acting like the kin in the sense that they're acting independently. That is not what novices are supposed to do. And so now it seems like they almost like need someone to mind them, because you can't have novices acting like real full humans. And this feels kind of like the chapter where like all of the chickens are coming home to roost. Like all of these dumb problems that have been created by Nynaeve and Elaine just being like, whatever, we'll deal with it later. They're all finally kind of piling up. And this feels like the biggest example of that. Like, this is a dumb problem that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I think it's nice that that's also the moment they've kind of stopped moving. It's like the problem's literally caught up with them, right? It's like, oh, we're not just chasing a destination now. Now we're here and we have to deal with all of this stuff. And so, yeah, this doesn't feel like an earth-shattering problem that's going to make things really difficult moving forward, but it's like, it's the silliness of having to lead now and to try to keep this pretty rough coalition they have going. I think, and I'll bridge into my thought, that is, I still have the most trouble kind of recognizing the kin and their motivations, because, you know, I always want to see them as separate from the Aes Sedai, because they're people who walked away or were asked to leave, right? And so, but then, like, now that they kind of had to all gang up to get the bowl and do the ritual, it's like, now we're all just together. It's like, I mean, I guess what you're saying is this is the example of the friction that remains.
Yeah, and this is actually something that I think Nynaeve points out a little bit later in the chapter, right? Where she says, the problem right now is that we can take the restless kin and give them something to do, right? Nynaeve says, all the women who were going to run away, I sent them back to Ibu Dar to rescue the captives. But her point is, like, what the kin are and what they're for doesn't totally make sense with the way that Egwene is talking about them, right? The kin are for runaways. They're to hide people so they don't get caught by the White Tower. But the White Tower now wants to welcome them. And so Nynaeve's point is kind of like, if we don't clearly define what the relationship between these two groups is, the kin don't really have anything holding themselves together anymore, right? The thing that really made the kin was they kept people hidden from the tower. Well, if the tower doesn't need them hidden anymore, this isn't one faction, it's 500 women who all have different thoughts and opinions and might not act in concert.
That was really helpful. I just want to confirm, when you used White Tower there, you mean Egwene's White Tower.
Egwene's White Tower. That is accurate. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That I think is helpful as a way to think about it. That the only, I mean, how many historical analogies could we come up with, right? Like the only thing uniting them was a shared enemy, and now that they don't have that, then they are left to wonder, why are they participating? They're not zealots. They're not, adherents to the cause even. So what are they going to do? And that's interesting and difficult. I'm curious if it really is Elaine's job to pull them all back in. It almost seems like if Egwene wants them as a part of her White Tower, then she's going to have to make an entreaty or an offer of some kind. While they are immediately Elaine and Nynaeve's problem, it's like it's above their pay grade, it feels like.
Yeah, and I think the interesting question is this something that Egwene already has a plan for, or is this something that Egwene is going to get kind of sideswiped with whenever the kin arrive on her doorstep? And we don't get any real indication of that here, so we're kind of left to wonder, where does this go from here? Because it feels like a dangling, potentially dangerous thread that we are kind of leaving hanging. The other thing that these kin who are novices really highlight is that we do have an Agatha Christie murder mystery, but we're only getting one clue per chapter, and it's not being well described. According to Van Dien, these ladies figured out some mysterious clue that narrows down the list of subjects to 3. That's right, it's 3 Aes Sedai whose name I didn't even remember. It's Merilil, Saretha, and Serianne. Those are the only possible suspects. Although I will also add, I immediately suspect both of these kin women and Van Dien, who have subsequently removed themselves from the list of suspects by giving this list.
And kin are not bound by any oaths.
That is accurate.
Definition. So, okay. Let's pretend I had any clue who these 3 women were. And,
yep.
So, it's certainly, and I don't know, I worry how often I am not tracking all these names is not just a flaw of Robert Jordan, but reveals my misogyny, which I apologize to your listeners. But it is really hard when the names overlap a lot, and then you just get these throw-offs of like, oh, these people are also around. So, okay, I'll watch these 3 and pretend I can remember their names for when they come up in the future.
Perfect. Van Dien then goes off to solve the murder mystery without us being there. I want to read the Van Dien novella that is just her trying to solve the killer of her sister. We then go forward a little bit, and the next discussion is all about the captured Seanchan. So we've had the big picture discussion about what's going on, how are we treating prisoners. I think what we're kind of left with is the very simple question, these women are a little bit potentially bombs, right? They could literally explode. And of them, 2 of the women are just vaguely described, but we do get a little bit more of a description of this woman, Olivia, I believe is her name. Olivia is 400 years old. She spent nearly all of that time as a damane. I believe it was described that she was captured when she was 13 or 14. And she despises Sul'dam. She is the only one of the damane who seems to actually want to be free. And notably, she has been described as exceptionally powerful in the One Power. They are worried about her leveling the palace if something goes wrong. And so this feels like a character whose name we need to be paying attention to a little bit, right? They're getting enough detail that it feels like they're here at least to stay a little bit. And when we're talking a power level that's on par with Egwene, Nynaeve, Elaine, we're talking about a big deal, Forsaken level power. So what are your thoughts on having this kind of character dropped into the middle of this already pretty volatile plot?
Just to make sure I have it right, damane are the ones who control the leash?
Incorrect. They are the ones who are
Sul'dam Saldam control the leash, and the damane are leashed, and the Adam is the leash.
Correct.
Okay. And so you just said that this character is a damane who hates Saldam. So she is leashed. She hates those who hold the leashes.
Correct.
Okay. And so the other piece of what you just said is I kept thinking about, like, there's clearly, I don't remember which psychological condition this is. The prisoners who love their captors.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. My brain keeps saying Dunning-Kruger, but I know that's not it. It's the other one.
Yeah, whatever syndrome. The one I can't remember. And Stockholm syndrome.
There it is.
Stockholm syndrome. And it feels to me like, while specifically you just said this character hates the one holding the leash, which is not technically Stockholm. When you're talking about 400 years leashed and conditioned in that way, this person potentially just being like set free in the world sounds incredibly dangerous. And so when you're talking about a bomb, you are absolutely talking about somebody with that level of power, but also somebody who's inherently unstable. I mean, I'm thinking of Treasure Island or cinematic masterpiece Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where you have a character whose like mind has been warped by their condition. And it's like, I think of this character as more in that state than like a rational person. And you know, I think where mythology is full of stories where the captor gets, or the prisoner gets freed before they're ready, and they just do it. I mean, it's the Matrix, right? It's the guy, Joe Pantoliano who wants to get put back in to taste the steak again. Like it's that kind of idea. Like, I feel like this is a dangerous person to be trying to free it all. And I think you implied this, but I will say it outright, which is like, and also this is item like 700 on their to-do list. It's like, oh yeah, and deal with somebody incredibly dangerous and psychologically unstable. Good luck to you.
Yeah, and I think in this discussion, they talk about the other two women who are like described as kind of a little more far gone. And the description is something like they like the idea of being collared. Like, they don't necessarily want to be collared by these people. They don't like the harm it does to them, but like if you asked them, they'd say, yeah, please put me back in the collar. And that level of kind of warped, as you're describing, I feel like is what we'd be battling with Olivia, this character who seems like she's maybe broken out of it a little more, but that feels like it's on the horizon kind of at all times. Also, as you mentioned, The Matrix, I do just want to point out that as someone who hasn't eaten meat in about 20 years, yes, I would betray a ship to have some steak. That sounds really good right now. I then actually briefly want to come back to Lan and Nynaeve. At the beginning of the chapter, we had talked about how like weird and a little bit icky it is that they are like still kind of very, PDA, still very like all over each other. But Lan kind of taking the moment to give his 2 cents about the morality of the Saldam, and then having Nynaeve listen to him, that felt like a much more healthy kind of like Warder Aes Sedai dynamic than we had even seen between like Lan and Moraine, right? Like that would have been a private conversation between those 2 characters. And so seeing Nynaeve and Lan working so well together in this kind of like professional setting, if you will, was kind of really fun, even though I agree with you, like they are bad friends and should not be talking about their honeymoon phase the way that they talk.
Yes, I think that's fair to say that despite the ick, that they do feel like they are very much together. I at no time suspected like, oh, it's not going well. It's the opposite. It's going too well and they're too obsessed with it. But yeah, I will co-sign that and think, I think it's easy for me to forget, I won't generalize it to anybody else, that Lan is a very powerful ally. He's smart. He's fierce as a warrior, right? He's good at the game and at politics. I also was reminding myself, like, he's the ruler of a fallen kingdom. Maybe that'll come up again. Maybe it won't. Yeah. It just, that was like book 1, right? Maybe a little into book 2. And so it's like, oh, I wonder if those details that we carefully talked about will come back around again. I think that and a couple other things I've referenced tonight, it's just like, it's emblematic of how far into the series we are, that it's like, well, we're not really working on some of these things or checking them off. They're just out there. And maybe it's my, experience with George R.R. Martin, where it's like, are these things that will matter, or are these things where he's gonna be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's too bad. that would have been something fun to pick up on, because it just feels like that there's potential for that with this many long forgotten bits hanging out there.
In my brain, I have one really big, he just forgot about that. And everything else he does a really, really good job about. So I think, that's a really good batting average. You should look forward to this more than you should be dreading it. But that's what this week was to some degree, right? Like, I want to use this as an opportunity to transition into our usual kind of wind down period, because what this week was is like 87 dangling threads. Like, nothing got resolved, nothing even really moved forward much. Like, Van Dien is now watching the elderly novices. That's about the plot resolution we got in these 2 chapters. But I find myself kind of excited for what comes next with it. And I believe, I didn't check this, but I think this is true, at least one of the 2 chapters next week continues us in this plot line. And so we get an opportunity to see kind of where all these dangling threads go. Next week, we'll be reading 2 chapters. That's Chapter 9, A Cup of Tea, and Chapter 10, A Plan Succeeds. And Greg, what plan succeeds? What happens? Tell me your predictions.
I don't know. I mean, I think you spotted me kind of flipping through my book. So my general reaction is like, this is good for first part of a book, although next week passes us a third of the way into this. And so, like, is this into this book in my page count? So is this like the moving from Act 1 into Act 2? This is still then at kind of Act 1, and it works, but it does make me curious, how many of these things can be solved. When I wrote down the chapters for next week, I was also intrigued by that second one more than the first, right? I guess a cup of tea is just not...
by a cup of tea?
Is it oolong? That was such
a good joke.
So A Plan Succeeds, I'm very curious about. It feels, I didn't look at the chapter icons, but it feels like the guy with plans out there is Rand. So I wonder if we're going to go back towards that plot line. Again, kind of imagining this book working like the last couple, where we spend 2 or 3 chapter chunks with a group of people. So we kind of did Perrin, now we've been with Elaine, and maybe a little more with Elaine, and then it feels like we got to check in with Rand as a part of that, but that could be wildly off. Just before we go, I want to note that one of the things I've been doing this summer, if it's summer, who knows when we're recording, is I've been trying to get my blog back up and running. So if anybody likes hearing me talk, but maybe wants me to be more coherent, I have 3 fresh blog entries up. I'm trying to make it weekly. So those are found at eoncanon.com, which is my Instagram handle, which is EYEONCANON. Nothing particularly relevant to this podcast, although I will say the latest entry is friends always accuse me of reading too much and watching too many movies, and they want to know why. And I tried to answer that question, but I don't know if I was successful. So that's kind of, hey, we read for this podcast, I think. Maybe we will next time. Through the Glass Columns.